Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to the Free Think Dojo. Typically in the dojo, I talk about a lot of events. I talk a lot about kind of the current state of things. And I know there's not a lot of good stuff going on to really, talk about. Sometimes it can feel that way, at least. But I think something that's been on my mind lately that is a little bit more of like a close to home, like close to just like a human being heart situation is, I grew up believing being a kind, good person, just really striving for the betterment around you with no expectation of any personal gain from that help, was always a good path to take. And it seemed as if being that quote unquote good person mentality was always going to push you in a direction that, really gave you the most out of life. And it gave you, success. And it gave you the ability to connect with others on a whole nother level. Now, I think this idea of being a good, kind person to people in the environment around you is not a lost art. I think it is still possible. I think most people are still trying to strive towards that type of lifestyle. But because we're so distracted these days, I feel like it's not a priority. And because it's not a priority, it's almost as if kind of becoming that personality of, wanting to help others and be charitable and be kind at a very small scale, even, is almost, frowned upon in a way. I don't think people realize that they're frowning upon it. I think it's become the norm these days to kind of downplay kindness because it doesn't get attention anymore. It's not something where, if you help someone, it's going to, get you followers on a, a YouTube channel or an Instagram or whatever it may be. And it's no longer become a kind of basic teachings to someone that's developing, like teenagers these days. I feel like they just don't see that. Obviously, being a good person, I think, is something everybody wants to strive for. But as we all know, the idea of a good person and what that means is subjective, right? It's based on an individual's viewpoints and their opinions. And I think it really depends on how, they were raised and what they were taught. But I think we can all agree that if we really strip things down to a very basic level, being kind to a person is really just about, helping or being supportive, not expecting anything in return. I think a lot of things, and I mentioned this in the past videos, can't remember which one, but a lot of things have become transactional these days. Everybody's expecting that if they do this for you, then they expect something in return. Now, obviously, there's a lot of things probably playing into that in today's society, but I think at the end of the day, if somebody was walking down the street and you were about to walk past them and they trip and fell, what would your first reaction be? You know what I mean? Would you get down and help them? Would you just walk past and walk away? If there were other people around watching you, would you get nervous and just, continue walking or pull out your phone and record them? Like, that's the reality these days. That's like the first instinct that a lot of people have. Now, there could be a lot of reasons for that, and, I don't really care to go too much into it, but it could be the social media influence. It could just be people are afraid these days of helping others. And some people might just have that anxiety towards it. But I think it's also one of those things where society sees, being kind or, just being a good, helpful person is not like cool anymore. You know what I mean? Like, it's almost like if you are nice to somebody, there's a term out there that's like real popular. I can't remember, but like if you support somebody on like Twitch or YouTube, it's like you're glazing them. That's what it is. Like you're glazing them, you're trying to butter them up or whatever. But I feel like that's become so like taken out of proportion at this point, because some people will just be like, I really love your channel, I appreciate your content, and someone else will see that as, oh, you're trying to either gain something from them or gain attention, or you're glazing them, right? I don't even know what that means, but it's so amazing to me that the new, I guess, norm for a lot of people is when they look at someone that's trying to help someone, it's almost as if it's an embarrassing trait. And I think when it becomes to that point, something's wrong. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm the best, person in the world, that I've never, walked away from somebody that I could have actually helped. I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm the perfect example of what a good person should be. But I was always taught growing up what the idea of kindness is, and the idea of just being an overall decent person and following a path in life that not not only gives you the comfortableness or the overall fulfillment in your life, but it also just brings balance to your entire environment, your relationships, your friendships, your workplace, your home life, right? The idea of being a good person, at least from what I was taught, is everything that you do is always about just bettering the ones around you. You're not necessarily looking to also get that in return. I made a video in the past about being a people pleaser and how that can negatively affect you. But I feel like when you go into the world thinking about, I want to help this person just because I want to, that will give you this certain sense of satisfaction or fulfillment within your life. And most of the time you don't even realize it. Now, it's not every day that you just stumble across an opportunity to help someone, right? Some people just don't run into that. There's some days where I don't talk to one human being and I'm just in my house all day, and you just don't get to go about that. And I don't think being a good person or a nice person is something that can, I guess, just be brought upon by yourself. It's more of a situational thing, but it's also just the way that you think, right? If you're thinking or watching somebody and you really appreciate what they do or just really enjoy, what you're taking part in, I think it's really what that first instinct comes down to. I think that's really what is changing so much in people these days. Because if they do feel a certain way, like they're wanting to support somebody, I think a lot of people get embarrassed by that now. I think they're almost embarrassed that they want to support somebody because the majority around them will either get jealous of that or just downplay it or just make fun of you for it. I think it's amazing to me that, I grew up with a lot of that happening. If you ever get bullied, sometimes it can be for that reason. But it's always amazing to me of the scale that it has grown to these days, where, the idea of being a kind and just, overall personality that wants to bring balance to everything around you in a positive, growth type mindset, it's not going to make you money. It's not going to make you, it's not going to make you more powerful. And that's kind of the messages that have been swarming around nowadays. And unfortunately, when a lot of those messages get flown around and it kind of overwhelms the idea of just being a human being to another human being, it gets pretty scary. Overall, I don't know how this will ever get fixed. I mean, it's probably been a problem longer than I've been alive. I mean, I've seen it throughout my entire life, and I know it's always been a case. And of course, these days, with a lot of things just becoming more monetized and a lot of things just becoming more, I guess, robotic in a sense, I feel like the emotion of a human being is starting to become valuable. And I think once that becomes the case, which it already is, I think it's a good point to kind of take a look at yourselves and just understand, what can I do better in just being a human being overall. But anyways, it's just something I've been thinking of recently. I've had a lot of instances where I could have been, the worst person in the situation. There's the saying of being the better person when you run into, others that are, giving you grief or whatever it may be. And I really always try to push to really focus on being the better person, but sometimes it's not as easy as it sounds. Sometimes I get frustrated with the person. Sometimes I get impatient. Sometimes I just do all that and then have to take a step back and, really evaluate the way that I'm handling this. But yeah, I don't think that's becoming the instinct anymore for a lot of people. And I don't think that's being taught as much, as it's almost an embarrassing trait for a lot of people. But I hope that changes soon. I hope that a lot of people start to drive towards more things that bring a healthy balance for everyone, not just certain groups or certain, couple of people, but for everyone. Now, it's definitely difficult. I don't think it's impossible to achieve that balance, or at least get closer to that. Someone's always going to be dissatisfied. Someone's always going to push back. But I think if we all just kind of think more about, what does it mean to be a good person and really just help others, not expecting any gain in return, I think that will kind of point us in a better direction on how we should move forward in that healthier way. But anyways, let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Is being a good person, in the subjective sense, of course, to you, is that still possible these days? Is that something that people are still striving towards? Is that even an option for people anymore? Or is that just not even what their instinct points them to anymore? I'd be really curious to see what you guys think. Once again, though, I appreciate everybody sticking around in the Free Think Dojo with me today. I did want to just point out, I apologize for a bit of inconsistency within my videos recently. Just to be frank with you, I've been dealing with a lot outside of YouTube. Nothing I can't handle, of course, but it's just been draining. So I've been really trying to just focus on what I can control in the moment. YouTube's still on my list, just might be a little less than usual. But anyways, if you liked the video, definitely subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Share it with your friends to grow the dojo. And I hope everyone has a great rest of the week here and a weekend. And I will see you guys next time.